McKinsey 7S Framework. The McKinsey 7S framework is a management model developed by business consultants Robert H. Waterman Jr. and Tom Peters, who also developed the MBWA, Management by Walking Around motif, and authored In Search of Excellence, in the 1980s. This was a strategic vision for groups, to include businesses, business units, and teams. The 7 S's are structure, strategy, systems, skills, style, staff and shared values. The model is most often used as an organizational analysis tool to assess and monitor changes in the internal situation of an organization. The model is based on the theory that, for an organization to perform well, these 7 elements need to be aligned and mutually reinforcing. So, the model can be used to help identify what needs to be realigned to improve performance, or to maintain alignment and performance during other types of change. Whatever the type of change, restructuring, new processes, organizational merger, new systems, change of leadership, and so on, the model can be used to understand how the organizational elements are interrelated, and so ensure that the wider impact of changes made in one area is taken into consideration. History. In 1977, McKinsey director Ron Daniel launched 2 projects. The first and major one, the Business Strategy Project, was allocated to top consultants at McKinsey's New York City corporate HQ and was given significant resources. It was headed by Frederick Gluck, and, despite promise, the project could not manage to effectively implement the new strategies. The second project was related to the problem of implementation, organizational effectiveness. This project was headed by Cleveland-based James Bennett. Peters states that directly after graduating with a PhD from Stanford and returning to McKinsey, Daniel handed him a fascinating assignment. Motivated by the new ideas coming from Bruce Henderson's Boston Consulting Group, Peters was asked to look at organization effectiveness and implementation issues in an inconsequential offshoot project nested in McKinsey's rather offbeat San Francisco office. While Daniel's first project was focused on business strategy, this second project was concerned with organization, which Peters defined as involving the structure and people side. The organization project was seen by Peters to be less important, according to Peters in a Fast Company interview. Despite being described as marginal, the project had an infinite travel budget that allowed to fly first class and stay at top-notch hotels, and a license from McKinsey to talk to as many cool people as could all around the United States and the world. Peters admits that there was no carefully designed work plan. There was no theory that I was out to prove. I went out and talked to genuinely smart, remarkably interesting, first-rate people. In addition to Carl Weick and Einar Thorsrud, Peters notes that Douglas McGregor's theory of motivation, known as Theory X and Theory Y, was directly influential on the direction of the project. In a 1978 article, Symbols, Patterns, and Settings, Peters argued that shifting organizational structure and inventing new processes, structure and system, respectively, were only 2 tools of organizational change. Peters then outlined 8 mundane tools that every manager has at their fingertips. He described this article as a tentative presentation and the first public expression of these ideas. In 1979, McKinsey's Munich office requested Peters to present his findings to Siemens. That provided the spur for Peters to create a 700-slide 2-day presentation. Word of the meeting reached the US and Peters was invited to present also to PepsiCo. However, unlike the hyper-organized Siemens, the PepsiCo management required a tighter format than 700 slides, so Tom Peters consolidated the presentation into 8 themes. Each of these 8 would form a chapter of In Search of Excellence. In 1980, Waterman joined Peters, and, along with Waterman's friend Tony Atos and Richard Pascal, both academics, came together at a 2-day retreat in San Francisco to develop what would become known as the 7S framework, the same framework that would organize In Search of Excellence. In June 1980, Peters published an op-ed in the Manager's Journal section of the Wall Street Journal titled The Planning Fetish. In this article, he stressed the importance of execution and dismissed the whole idea of strategy. As strategy was McKinsey's main operation at the time, this was seen as a frontal assault on the company, leading Mike Bulkin, the head of the New York office, to demand that Daniel fire Peters. The primary innovative theme that undergirded what would become the well-known In Search of Excellence book was that structure is not organization. This also happened to be the title of the 1980 journal article authored by Bob Waterman, Tom Peters, and Julian Phillips, in which they argue that the picture of the thing is not the thing. An organizational structure is not an organization. This article also introduced what would become the McKinsey 7S framework. In December 1981, Peters left the company after agreeing to a 50% royalty split with McKinsey. Later, Waterman stayed at the firm for 3 more years but received no royalties from In Search of Excellence. In Search of Excellence. The work of Peters, Waterman, Atos, and Pascal leading up to the widely successful In Search of Excellence, not only elaborated the 8 themes that would form each chapter, but also the 7 S's frame the different ways in which the firms profiled in the book were excellent. The Art of Japanese Management. Atos and Pascal, although not named as co-authors of the 1982 publication of In Search of Excellence, published their own study in a 1981 book titled The Art of Japanese Management. This book used the 7S framework to compare the Japanese firm Matsushita with the American company ITT. Just as Peters emphasized throughout his writing, the important distinction between American and Japanese management was not the so-called hard technical aspects of organization, but rather the soft cultural aspects. Objective. To analyze how well an organization is positioned to achieve its intended objective. Usage. The 7 interdependent elements. Hard elements. Soft elements. Limitations. The framework gives rise to a few vital points, like